Okay, I needed a panel as powerful as this to follow up with Zia, and how excited I am to have all these wonderful leaders with me. I'm being very respectful of Devendra here, who's a great leader, the token leader, as he was called in the backroom conversation here. But it's hugely exciting to have all of them, and the name of the session, I think, with having all the leaders that we have here on the panel today, should not be redefining women leadership, should be redefined women leadership. Each one of them, in their personal and professional capacity, represents what it takes to be a leader, and I wouldn't add the tag of a woman leader over there, a leader in the 21st century workforce. So before we get on the panel, let me just very briefly talk about the foundation and why the topic of discussion today is a very important one for us, and why the topic of women leadership is very important for the foundation. So we are an impact fund. We invest in financial inclusion, education, and jobs and livelihoods, all of which are very, very important social problems of India. And at the same time, are problems which are being solved by the entrepreneurs of India. And we believe that's where leadership has a huge role to play in India in solving some of these toughest problems. So when we invest in companies, we are investing in the talent and leadership in these companies. Because we are investing in a big way in financial inclusion, we already see the talent, the value add, the leadership that many women leaders are bringing to that space, and we want to see much more of that in all the sectors of our interest, and the broader country defining and country molding sectors that are there today. So when we thought about this session, we wanted to talk about the whole theme of entrepreneurship and what does it take to be a leader and to be an entrepreneur. And Hardika is here with us to share her story, her personal story, her leadership journey in that way. But how do investors then look upon leadership? Right, and I think we have Shivani with us, who is a rare fund manager in that space, in the sense of having very few women investors in India at all. But having having Shivani share with us on what does it mean to actually be looking at a very special segment, much like what Zia spoke about, but a lot of our consulting firms, our law firms, services industry, it's very entrepreneurial in that sense. You have to build almost your own P&L, your own network, your own your own business within a larger structure, and she represents it beautifully, and it's great to have her on this session today. And Avni and Devendra, they actually bring to the panel not just what they're being able to do in their personal capacities and professional capacities as leaders, but what are they represent the big corporates, and what are they doing, not just in terms of nurturing a lot of women leadership talent in their companies, but also how do they look upon theirs are very women-oriented businesses in terms of who their target segment are, who their customers are, and how are the big companies making that change. So in that sense, I think it's a beautiful panel. I hope we will learn a lot from them, from each one of their leadership journey. Before I go ahead with my questions for the panel, I think it will be a wasted opportunity if we could not get to the questions you had as audience for the panelists today. So maybe before I jump to a structured set of questions for them, if there are 2 or 3 questions which you had for any specific panelist or for the panel overall, we could take them up front so that the speakers could address them during the panel. The question of what does it take to be a leader in your sector? We all represent a diversity of sectors here. Maybe I'll just start from Devendra and just hearing from you on what does it take to be a leader in your sector?
Thanks. I think whichever sector there is, I think there's some traits or characteristics which will run common. And I guess they're very similar whether you're a man or a woman. And I think for entrepreneurs or a company like mine, Future Group, which is led by an entrepreneur very strongly, and even like we have Ashni, Avni, the daughters also involved running companies. I think the trait of being able to have passion, what Zia was speaking about, what she spoke in the end, I think that strikes a chord with me. I think what she said that if 290 days, and frankly it is 365 days, because in today's tech world, even when you're in the office, you're at home because you could shop on your phone, or even when you're home, you're actually answering emails or WhatsApp. So unless you're passionate and you share the vision of the company where you work, or if you're an employee, if you don't share the vision of the entrepreneur for whom you work or the company, I think you can't become a leader or either an entrepreneur. I think another thing which I see is resilience, which I find in entrepreneurs is a very, it's like something which you really need to have. Like, so I think a very strong belief in self itself will differentiate leaders as well as entrepreneurs from the rest. And again, these are gender neutral. I mean, these are qualities which you will need either way. And I think what's also important is that there will be moments in life, like, and more in women's life, and on the journey, when some times will come, as Zia said, that when you're less productive, and I've never looked at it like that, but now that she said it makes one think. I think you have to time yourself at certain stages you can give it your best, and certain stages you can't. So that's a very interesting one that, like, I've never thought, like, what age in our life we decided which career to pursue. Now, when she was asking, I was supposed to think back that in my family, everybody became a doctor and engineer, so it's a fact. I can admit that my parents told me, you should become a doctor, and we took that path. I won't say it didn't pay off, but I look back that probably it could have been something else as well. So I think a lot of mentoring is required for people at younger age to even decide what they're good at, versus stereotyping or pushing them in one direction. And frankly, men need as much help as women there. But on traits, on leadership, I think, and most of our professionals, if I separate the entrepreneurs, I think empathy is a very big one. And I won't generalize, but I would say women are much better at it, because I think to understand feelings and emotions, somebody asks of ego, I think that's a big, it's a challenge in corporates. Ego does come out. People don't talk about it, but ego does come out. And that really leads to a lot of issues and turfs between, my business, your business, my area, your area, my people, your people. I think if you have empathy, I think you can go very far away.
Absolutely. I think common traits that we will agree apply to both, male and female leaders. Shivani, your thoughts on traits for leadership?
Sure. I'll also touch upon, I think, one of the questions that was asked about why such few women entrepreneurs get funded. So, my industry is one where everyone, when they come and meet me, they say, okay, we can count on one hand or two hands the number of private equity women managers, and then they find out that I started my own firm, and that, puts it in one hand, et cetera, right? And this is not true only in India. This is actually a global, to the point that someone brought up, this is a global phenomenon. So if you look at the US, for example, where I spent many years, you would have less than 10% of the fund managers would be women, and even that 10% number, I think, is an exaggeration. Whereas you see a reasonable representation in other fields which are very, very demanding as well. For example, doctors, accountants, lawyers, etc., right? So this is a very curious anomaly. Why should this be the case? Especially on the buy side, where you assume that you have more control over your time, you're able to make seasoned, judgment, you're not running around at somebody else's beck and call. You would assume that women would gravitate towards this industry, but in fact they don't. So, so I just want to share a small perspective on that, and then also bust a couple of myths around it, right? So, one thing is that this stereotype of, women and numbers, and women should have typically played a supporting role in families when it came to making big investment decisions. Always control family budgets, but investment decisions were typically left to the husbands. Maybe it has its roots in that. But I found a very, very interesting study, which I wanted to share with all of you, where they analyzed data for the hedge fund industry. I'm in private equity, but it's all sort of related. And they found that they created an index of women hedge fund managers, and they compared their performance to the general index. And over a consistent period of several years, so I'm not talking about a 1 year, 2 year thing, there was a 2 percentage point differential, meaning that the women hedge fund managers outperformed the general pool by 2% consistently year on year on year, and so everybody knows the power of compounding, right? And so this was curious, and they called in a bunch of psychologists and said, why is this the case? And again, at the risk of stereotyping and generalizing, there were 2-3 reasons, right? One was that when it comes to making investments, men tend to be overconfident than women. So they sometimes think they know more than they do. Whereas you ask a woman, if she knows something, she'll typically know a lot about it, but don't know, you can be very, very successful, right? So if you come into a situation and you don't come at it with a feeling of arrogance or I know so much, you can be a very, very smart and astute investor. Secondly, women tend to see things in a more holistic perspective. So they can see all the risks and move forward, whereas men tend to fall prey to the confirmation bias. I think this is a great investment, so all the data that I see is going to confirm the fact that I think it's a great investment, okay? So there was a very interesting editor and writer, Luann Lofton, who studied this, and she said the feminine traits of investing, masculine traits, and then she studied Warren Buffett. Any guesses as to whether Warren Buffett is a man or woman when it comes to his style of investing? He's a woman. And so then they said, Warren, your way of investing is that of a woman? He said, absolutely. So
that says it all, I would say. Hartika, you're doing the tough one, huh? The entrepreneurship, raising funding, on the road again to raise a very large round, but managing a very successful business in a very, very tough segment, I must say. What do you think it takes to be a leader?
Well, a lot of things have been said already. The one thing that sort of came first top of mind when this question was asked by Prachi was humility. Being in a space that is on the fringe of everything else, the biggest issue is assuming too many things that you think you know about your customer. And so going in with humility, which ironically what we are hearing both Shivani and Devendra talking about is that women have humility in plentiful. We're not sitting here saying we know everything. So having that is the biggest strength, and I would say a leadership requirement, regardless of male or female, but we're already predisposed to it, and we should use that in, at least from an entrepreneurial journey point of view, in terms of understanding the customer, understanding his need, and being very open and very aware that we don't know all of their challenges, so any solution that is to be created has to be across the ecosystem, not just solving the top part of the problem, but going all the way down the iceberg and solving the root cause as well.
Hartika, do you want to take a quick stab at, Kinara is a portfolio company of ours, and we are extremely proud of it. But a quick stab at raising funding, and why do you think women-led, or first of all, do you think women-led ventures have trouble raising funding, and why do you think so, if that is the case?
Look, raising funding is difficult across the board. And there definitely is a bias in the system. And to an extent, everyone's to blame for it. The guy who's writing the check is a guy. He's to blame for that bias. The woman who's asking for that money is, we've been taught to doubt ourselves way too much. Maybe that's the other leadership quality we need to develop, is to just be ballsy. Right? So we go in with into these conversations, and we let people, at least I have seen myself going into conversations, and just to give you a little bit more sort of background, I come from consulting as my other career, which I've long left, and my only other job has been this journey. So I've moved from 20 years almost in a global consulting role to creating a financial services business in India, not knowing anything about regulation, not knowing anything about the industry, the challenges, anything around this whatsoever. And when you go in with your conviction and this belief that there is a market and there's a reason why you believe it, and you have the data for it, and you have the model to solve for it, and you have a solution that you think can tie together, often you hear just nothing but a lot of naysayers trying to drag you down. And I have gone home many times doubting myself in those moments and trying to find within me that single most self-conviction to say, no, I know my customer, which is why I come back to the humility part. Because I have spoken to them, because I've understood them, and because I've been open about it, and I know my customer, and may I say this, these idiots with money, they can sit here and tell me they know him, but they have never gotten out of their big white glass houses to get out on the street, to get into these smaller towns, to talk to the guy, and ever understood what I have spent time understanding now. So you know the problem, and you know it well, and it has to be a good, well-defined problem that you're going after, allowed me to go out back into the same space and push back on all the investors and to tell them why I believed in what I did to be able to come around and raise the capital I have to be able to build this business. So that's my story.
With you, but for the idiots part. Kanchan, you get to see the best and the worst of the leaders in India and abroad in the business community. But before we come to that, I think specifically from you, what does it take to be a leader in a management consulting firm?
Hi, so I've been in management consulting for many years now, actually my entire career. But I think if I think also about services industries more broadly, and I caught the, the last few sentences that as Zia was talking, I think there's one thing which is quite distinct about being in the services business, which to me is also maybe the single largest factor really determining success. It's all about being a self-starter. You know, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship. You know, that word has many connotations attached with it. But if I use a simpler word, just being a self-starter, just being out there, making decisions for yourself, creating your own network, pushing yourself to do a set of things without waiting for direction to come from somewhere else. I think that to me is a big trait. When you are in the services business, often you don't have a specific product to sell. You don't have anything very specific to sell actually if you're a management consultant. And so that brings me to my second point. I think just having the confidence and knowing that you can add value, I think that's the second thing that I would talk about. That confidence doesn't come from just saying that, hey, look, I'm confident. I think, it comes from a deep belief in your own capability and in knowing that you've been able to create a lot of value over the course of the work that you've done, and you can bring that to the table each and every time. And I find that that's one place where women tend to take a backseat. We are much more comfortable saying, you can also do this. This is the way things are, kind of leaning back. And not coming to the center stage and saying, look, I feel really confident about the value that I can bring to the table and really confident about what change I can create here. So that I would say is the second one. And then the third one, I think, which has been talked about a lot, is just your ability to foster relationships, having empathy, having the humility to hear the other person, really listen, and then understand and respond. So I think those are some of the traits which stand out as far as I'm concerned and what I've seen in with very successful women in a whole bunch of services industries, more broadly than consulting as well.
Do you want to take a quick stab at, because you're very closely involved with recruiting as well, do you want to take a quick stab at, the question that the audience had on, how early do you start thinking about careers? How do those decisions get taken? What are the biases there? Just a quick one if you'd like.
I've gone back to campuses many times over the past 2 decades. I also used to run recruiting for BCG at one point. And what I find is, I think at that point, the decision-making process is not different for men and women, right? When you're passing out of campus, you're just thinking about, what am I passionate about? What do I think I will enjoy doing? What I often find is that, and I have now started telling the younger women in my organization, is that as women, you need to think a little more long-term. And you need to think about the fact and accept the fact that there will be life stages when you will not be able to do everything that you believe you can do today. And in what environment and in what place will you get the flexibility to go through those life stages in a way that you can continue to keep your career, in a form and shape that's important to you. And I think that's one piece of advice that I think we don't give to women on campuses. And if there was a way to actually sit down with women who are making these career choices very early in their educational, academic life, or even in the first few years of their career, and really say, take a long-term view, I think it's, that would be my one piece of advice. And yes, it would be great to have people like Naina and Zia and many of the others go to campuses and talk about this. But I think a lot of the middle level, women managers today are also in a great place to do that and to really talk about their struggles, and how do you take a long-term enough view to be able to, to chart your own course there.
Avni, you have a very special position being both at a business which, which is being led by a woman leader.
As a personal choice, or if I look at other leaders, whether men or women, I really don't differentiate. I think the one thing that really differentiates people who take the responsibilities of being a leader is one is great passion for what they like, and they're damn good at what they do. So I think one is you really are in love with what you're doing, and you're very good at it. Second is, I think, and for the last 1 hour I've been here, I've heard Zia, Pinky, and co-panelists and several people in the audiences talk. I think we're getting into this entire women versus men, and we have to have somebody inspire us to get there. I come from a simple background, and if somebody were to ask me who's an inspiring leader in my life, it's my mom, actually. She had an admission to a medical college in Mumbai, and she chose not to take it because she wanted to get married and have children. And today she's all of 65 years of age, and she has Parkinson's, and not a single day goes by when I don't admire her relentlessness, her honesty, her authenticity to really fight everything in life and do what she really wants to do. Leave aside what the corporate will do for you or what your family will do for you. I think as individual leaders, you need to be very authentic and come to terms with what you want and really go after it. I think all these conversations about I need support and somebody should give me mat leave and somebody should tell me in college that there's a great other side to the corporate world, I think is a whole lot of baby talk that we're indulging ourselves in. If you're out there to make life choices, coming back to what the quality of leadership is, authenticity and a little bit of brutality, that you're going to get what you want if you fight for it, but you have to be ready to really fail. And one of the leading conversations on, globally that leaders are talking about is that if you choose a path of leadership and you want to get to the top of an organization or a political environment or a profession, whether it's services or otherwise, I think you need to have the courage to fail. That is the new ground rule of leadership. If you are not going to demonstrate your vulnerability, you're never going to win. I mean, look at the environment around us. 22, 21-year-olds are making billions of dollars being entrepreneurs. Nobody went to their college and inspired them to do it, right? It's their courage of what they want to do. So to my mind, really, it's about authenticity, being absolutely, courageous and showing and demonstrating your vulnerability and not giving up. Whether you get support from the government through regulation or through your family, ultimately it's our own battle, right? Whether you're a man or a woman, it's so bloody competitive out there that you have to want what you do, and then you have to make things in your environment move towards what you want. So I'm very passionate about the cause of women being at the top, but I think this sorry state of affair of saying I need this and somebody do this for me or somebody inspire, then maybe leadership is not the area that you should want to do.
I've heard this common theme of passion across all of us. And Avni, what you just said resonates a lot with, I think, a lot of us. Just before we were coming here, we were having this conversation. That is this conversation about, the support we need, the inspiration we need, or whatever we choose to call it. Is it just it's just a luxury that some of us have, that we can choose to not work, that we can choose to say this career or that career or stay at home. When we look at, and as Zia was talking about the leaky pipeline, as you look at, so many women out there, or so many of us out there, who just don't have that choice, right? Who have to go to work because you need to be at work. And so, how much of that conversation that we are all treading towards is a luxury versus, a real need that we have at the workplace. But let me go back to what you started with saying, Avni, the role of role models. You talked about your mom. But what do you think about the role that mentors, your role models can play in your own leadership journey when you have those moments when you're having self-doubt, when you're having when you're rethinking, when you're having all those moments, and also when that from a corporate perspective and what your own experience has been. But where do entrepreneurs, do you think, get those role models? Because it's a very lonely journey in that sense also of having, a mentor or a role model?
No, certainly I don't discount or in any way disparage having inspiration in life. And I think inspiration can come from different walks of life. I remember when I had taken my mat leave and I was at home, I had a maid, nanny, my mother, mother-in-law, cook, servant, an entire army to help me. And I was still, oh my God, I want to get back to why did you shut it down? And in some way messaging that it's okay to fail, you're not alone who's failing. So I think things like that, innovative communities will be, in my view, more supportive and something that entrepreneurs can relate to, because every time going to conferences or having a successful banker or an investor advising you, I don't think they're able to really, move the needle emotionally for them.
Have that real conversation and have that empathy. And Kanchan, you get to see a cross-section of businesses across different sectors, across different sizes, businesses which are doing extremely well, are struggling to do well. Where do you see the best practices in India, and which are the ones which stand out for you in terms of nurturing women leadership?
So it's hard to talk about, a single company that stands out, but I think there are 2 or 3 impressive things that I've seen different corporates do, and I think BCG is one of them, which has really helped. I think the first one is this conversation about diversity, just moving it away from we need to do it for the women in our organization to saying we need to do it for our business. And that to me is a very important change that needs to happen in the vocabulary of everyone. Nobody is doing us a favor. Right? Nobody in any organization is doing the women any favors by either maternity leave or flexibility or what have you. We are doing it because there's a very strong business case. There is strong talent out here. We want to ensure that that talent does not become a leaky pipe, and there's a strong business case for that. So I think leaders who are able to change the conversation and take it away from saying, let's do it as a favor to somebody, to actually saying this is really core and important to my business, is I think the single most important lesson that I've learned. In the absence of that, I think everything else kind of fails by the wayside, because then it's just it's just lip service. The other thing I'd say is, I think just picking up on what Avni was talking about, I think organizations which are able to create a bit of a positive momentum, focus on maybe a few women who have done really well, create some inspiring kind of role models and stories within the organization, and find a way to hone that. I think that's the other important learning. What I've seen is, and maybe that's true of some of us on the stage as well, if you see organizations which have women leaders, you'll typically find more women at the next level as well. I've seen that correlation play out in 8 or 9 out of 10 cases. Even in the private equity world, for example, which is something I spend a lot of time on, I find that oftentimes when the office leader is actually a woman, you'll find many more women at the next level. I don't know what leads to that, but I think some part of it might have to just do with the fact that there is a role model who's really inspiring. And then, I think there is some classical stuff that most organizations in India have started doing around providing flexible work models, around providing longer maternity leaves, giving women the option to kind of go in, come out, change roles for a period in time. But to me, all of that is table stakes. Because if it means a significant compromise in the career that the woman is making, then, there's really nothing in there which matters. So, that to me is table stakes. I think what really matters, like I said, is, first, the fact that it's a business conversation and not a nice to have conversation, and the fact that you're actually able to create some positive momentum in the organization around that.
We're all talking a lot about, who we find inspiring, what we find inspiring, the content of our work, which wakes us up in the morning, takes us back to work every day. And Hardika, from you, it will be, very interesting to hear what inspires you, because, you're starting something from scratch, you are building it every day, and you're doing it the tough way, and you've made the switch from a career where you didn't have to. So what inspires you? What are you passionate about, and what is driving the change that you're trying to bring about?
When I think about why I started this, there is one single thing that if I look back at my career and kind of someone was asking about how do you make your career choices, sometimes hindsight also gives you a very good perspective on what choices you made and trying to unpack why you made them as well. the thing that I found that every time I had to do the impossible is what brought me the most joy. It was this ability to go out and debunk something. And so that's what drives me to do the work I do now. And again, 6, 7 years in, now looking back a little bit more in this rear view mirror, I realized that the push probably came from that to debunk. There are more customers to service and there's just that single-handedly for me keeps me going in terms of wanting to stay in the game, wanting to be able to do more.
You're fabulous. Shivani, you already spoke a lot about, women-led funds, the investment strategies, et cetera, et cetera. I think it'll be also very interesting to hear from you because the fund has a special point of view on women-oriented business as well, right? So I think it'll be interesting to hear both your insights in terms of what do you think takes over there, what as a fund manager you think is the growth opportunity there, and also a broad sense on, what is your whole outlook on not just women-led businesses, but female-oriented businesses.
So as a fund, we are sector agnostic, but what we do is we spend a lot of time studying themes that we think are very exciting and that are driving change on the ground level, okay? And so one of the themes of our fund is the fact that we would like to back women-oriented businesses. So I'm not saying necessarily businesses that are run by women, although a lot of them tend to outperform, but I am talking about companies that create products for women, okay? And when we went about our study, we found it very, very interesting because if you look historically, women have always controlled family budgets, right? So that's not new, we all know that. But what's changing in India is the fact that women are now prioritizing themselves in the decision making. So earlier, in earlier generations, when women controlled family budgets, they said, well, this is our budget, and in-laws come first, children come second, husband comes third. I'm just making this up, I don't know, in no particular order, but in some order. But anyway, they came last, right? So discretionary income in the hands of women, even if they were working, was kind of meaningless because they'd already spent it on all these other people. But now, if you look at the millennials and you look at the young women, they're saying, listen, if I'm not happy, I'm not healthy, I'm not fit, then my family isn't either. And so that shift is very, very exciting for us. And we've seen lots of examples. So to me, a very interesting example a couple years back was GlaxoSmithKline when they came out with women's Horlicks. And you could literally see how they put a toe in the water because there was no advertising, nothing. All of a sudden, there's this brand, and literally within a year, it became more than 100 crores. And you had the managing director sounding quite bewildered himself when he said, I guess we need to relook at this whole thing because women are prioritizing themselves. We have an investment, we are large shareholders in a company called Enamor, which is the market-leading company in the women's lingerie segment. It was very interesting. When we brought in our insights, we found there were a lot of things fantastic about the company, but the one thing when we came in, we found that the positioning was about transform yourself. And we said, hey, let's relook at this because this may not be the right message in the context of today's women. And we hired a consultant to interview young women in metros and smaller towns. And the feedback was that young women today are increasingly becoming more self-confident and have a good body image. And so we changed the positioning of the company to fabulous as I am. So this is a theme that's very exciting for us as investors.
And I think it's an interesting theme overall, right? I mean, I'll just extrapolate this theme to what Zia was saying about speak up, what both Kanchan and Hardika were saying about being confident, right? And I think, just the whole positioning of saying, yes, we are putting ourselves first, yes, we are watching out for us, is a trend in itself, which is an interesting trend for women to show more confidence, to be more out there, to watch out for themselves, to speak up and prioritize themselves and bet on themselves and put themselves first. And a very similar trend across what you manage, and you manage not just in terms of the products that you are selling, but also your entrepreneurs who are selling to you, or your the companies which are coming and putting the brands on your shelves. So what's your view on that, Devendra?
No, I'll actually build on what Shivani said, and that's very interesting because we, by and large, like we have retail stores and we study consumer behavior a lot, and this whole conversation of women having guilt when it came to spending, that first they'll take care of the family, the husband, the kids, and then in the end, they'll take care of them. Like, you'll be surprised, even in insurance of the large food halls itself we have. I think gifting themselves, and now that's totally gender agnostic. It doesn't really matter because people are coming into the workforce earlier, they're ambitious, and they want to reward themselves because they're not waiting somebody else will reward me. And I think this whole thought process, if you see the last 50, 70 years, what was the kitchen? The kitchen, there was no appliances, but now a kitchen it's like a manufacturing unit. The number of gadgets in the kitchen which will help you cook faster, from microwave, this dish, that, you can spend less time in the kitchen. And I think the whole coming of mobiles, I think it has made, for men and women, I think life is a great leveler because thanks to technology, you could be sitting anywhere in the world. You don't have to travel so much, unlike in the past. These could be hindrances for women. But thanks to technology, you could sell sitting on the mobile, you could buy, you could interact. I think, and if you marry all this with what Shivani is saying, I think these changes are coming in our society. And with one generation, actually this could tip. And when I was hearing all the women leaders, and I keep hearing, this is it's a very, in a way, a very difficult topic because when you see what corporates should do, how they should encourage more women, one keeps thinking like, these policies of, okay, maternity leave, paternity leave, this. A lot of things sound well, but personally to me, I think the most important thing is how we bring up our kids at home. And that's something which I have learned from my wife. And I come from a family where my mother worked all her life, my wife works, my sister works, everybody I know in my family, all the women work. So when such a topic comes, you're forced to think, acha, oh yeah, and then you said only 14% of, of course there is something wrong. But I think when you talk of a company or a corporate, who hires? There's an HR manager, right? Decisions are made on hiring. Kanchan said they go to campus, and while 10% of women in India, they have 25% diversity. I think if you start at a younger age that everybody is equal and there's a respect for every gender, I think if that thinking comes in the corporate world and entrepreneur thing, I think that's where it's going to make a difference. Of course, I'm not saying that corporates don't have to do. Of course, all this has to be done. But it must be complemented with, I think, what starts within ourselves or within our homes, actually.
And I think it starts with each one of us. And I think that was the theme of what I heard from all of us throughout the panel, that it is, it's no one out there, trying to make it happen for you. All of us are trying to, make it happen for ourselves and many other leaders, whether they are male or female. The lessons of leadership which all of them shared, right, as their own personal leadership journeys. I didn't see any, any gender-specific thing over there. Be authentic, be passionate, give it your 100%, have the humility to accept failure and learn from it. And I think that's what it takes to be a leader and a woman leader in the 21st century. And, examples over here show that it's amply evident that it's possible, and, change starts with each one of us to make sure it's happening for us and at our workplace and whatever part of the ecosystem that we can influence and that we can change. Before I close the panel, I am seeing my time is up and I have now over time. But do we have time to take questions?
I'm a little confused about something. So I guess we kind of agree that traditional systems of patriarchy exist, sexism exists, discrimination exists, old boys clubs exist. Now the answer to this, in my mind, cannot be gender neutrality. So my question is to anyone, do you think that there needs to be an active system of positive discrimination? Now, most of what was said was on an individualistic level, that this is what I need to do as a human being. I need to be determined, I need to be hardworking, I can't be a crybaby, I shouldn't whine, take things in my stride, etc. But old boys clubs are not made by all individuals. They're also men giving their hand out to other men and making those clubs. So do you think that women need to take women in powerful positions, positions of leadership as investors, need to have a system where you're mindful of, I don't know, positively discriminating and
the panel, and I think any one of you, I think with the millennial age and the new era of technology, I see a lot of mutation in the definition of leadership. And I'd sort of value some of your comments on that. Thank you. Be it male leadership or female leadership, it's general leadership that's,
Okay.
you know,
so I think,
also
you know,
seeing a general mutation over
Sure.
time.
So I think sort of similar questions on what is the trend changing in millennials towards, towards women leadership. But I think, a very interesting question also over there on, are we just shoving it under the carpet and saying it's all fine and, there are no all-boys club at an individual level? Go ahead, Hartika.
I want to address your question. You're absolutely right. That club is still very live, active, and two sort of parallel comments. One is we have to be our biggest cheerleaders. That's number one. And so, how do you change an entire system? That's a very large, complex, and problem at so many levels, right? So why we are talking about individual stories here is because we can possibly only see the worldview we live in and do what we can in our worldview, right? And for example, one of the things in my leadership team, we are 50% women. And there is a conscious choice to not let men or women in the organization make excuses for hiring someone if they're qualified to do the job. I don't want to hear it that they're a woman, that they will get pregnant. I don't want to hear it that they won't travel. I don't want to hear any other nonsense. That's a conscious choice that comes in. And once you start doing that, I'm finding that my COO, who is now a man, continues to propagate that too and say to everybody, hire the right resource. And so hopefully that trickles few levels down. And that goes back to what Kanchan was saying. There is somewhere along this some empirical data that if there's a woman leader, there are other women around them that sort of seem to be in larger numbers than elsewhere. So, maybe this is a pledge to me to do more, and for my team to do more, and for us to collectively do more. But I absolutely agree that there's more to be done, and we have to figure out how we can do that in the circles we live in.
I think it's a very interesting question, and I really just want to add something to that. I completely agree with, with what you were saying. I've seen in my own organization, it took us a while before we had the first woman, and actually it was me who had a child while being, in the company. And then after that, it kind of unleashed a positive momentum. And I've personally seen at least 10, 15, 20 women over the past 7, 8 years, kind of go through that journey. And, I have been kind of championing those women within the system, not because, and I think the only thing I want to be careful of is there is no discrimination. There is no woman with a lower talent who is kind of getting pushed up. But I think there are stages in life that women go through when actually the playing field is not level. And so they need that little bit of support, to kind of bring that playing field to a more level. And I think senior women in every organization can play a very important role there. And I think that's important for everyone to imbibe, and it goes a huge way. I've personally seen it.
All right, with that, absolutely, Shivani, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something slightly provocative to that. Okay, so first of all, I completely agree that women in power should do something about it, because just to say that we shouldn't whine and there isn't discrimination is, first of all, is not true. And I wanted to give you a specific fact around it. Sadly, there was a study which was conducted where they took a real life venture capitalist. Her name is Heidi Roizen, very successful venture capitalist. And they had two professors who did the case study, one who used the real name. This is from Sheryl Sandberg's book, by the way. And to me, this was a very, very touching point in the book, right? And so one professor uses Heidi's name and teaches the class. The other professor has exactly the same facts, but just makes Heidi's name Howard, right? And then both the classes are asked how accomplished, how successful, how ambitious this person is. Everybody says fantastic. And then they asked whether they would like to work with this person and how likable this person is. In Heidi's class, a lot of the classes she's not very love, which I wanted to put out in the panel, is that one of the things that holds women back is a lot of us tend, again, at the risk of generalizing, a lot of us tend to want to be liked. That drives innately who we are, and it's true for men, it's truer for women, okay? Again, Sheryl Sandberg, in her first review meeting with Mark Zuckerberg, he said, you're fabulous, but you're going to go nowhere because you are just driven by, wanting to be liked. So I would urge you, as this change happens, and this change will happen, it will take a while, it will be slow, it's complex, it's not easy. But as women leaders, as women entrepreneurs, let's be driven by other things than just wanting to be liked, okay? That's why I said I wanted to end on a slightly provocative note, because we can do great things in positions of power, and we can make a lot of change, and sometimes that's a little uncomfortable. So let's get a little uncomfortable.
And I hope this great conversation would continue over the break. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time and sharing all your insight. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone.